Right. So picking up from our last discussion on the philosophical development of Pyrrhonism, we're now zeroing in on a core tenet that really shapes the Pyrrhonists' entire worldview and, crucially, their practical approach to life. What both Sextus's major works hammer home is this idea. The skeptic just doesn't buy into the notion that anything has an inherent natural goodness or badness. This isn't just some abstract philosophical point. It's the linchpin for understanding how these folks actually live and make decisions. It's the starting block for everything else. So, this suspension of judgment, it's supposed to be broad, right? Unrestricted. But hold on, Sextus immediately puts a little asterisk on that. He clarifies that the skeptic suspends judgment about how things are. Think about honey, it appears sweet. That appearance, that subjective experience, is not something the skeptic debates. Is it really sweet? Ah, that's where the suspension kicks in. The question of its underlying nature, its essence, is what gets put on hold. This distinction between appearance and reality is key. It means scientific questions about the world's structure fall under this umbrella of suspended judgment. But here's where it gets tricky, like my example of being on the 12th floor of Johns Hopkins. Is that belief about how things are, or just how they appear? It's clearly not a scientific theory, but it's not just a fleeting sensation either. Sextus doesn't give us a neat rule book for drawing this line. Scholars have debated this endlessly, and honestly, the text itself might be a bit fuzzy here. It's one of those classic interpretive knots in ancient philosophy. Okay, so what exactly is the belief the skeptic is trying to avoid? It's pretty straightforward. The idea that some things are genuinely, objectively good, and others are genuinely bad by nature. Now, Sextus points out this isn't some esoteric philosophical position held only by academics. Ordinary people believe this too. He's not talking about complex metaphysical systems here. It's more like the common sense view that murder is bad, honesty is good, period. End of story. By adding really or by nature, he's suggesting that even everyday ethics often carries a whiff of objectivity, the sense that these values aren't just my preferences. Think J.L. Mackey's famous argument from Queerness, the idea that objective values would be strange kinds of entities. Sextus seems to tap into something similar, though likely less formally articulated. And importantly, he's not just targeting the sophisticated philosopher's version of ethical realism. He's saying the skeptic is out for all forms of this belief, whether it's the simple gut feeling or the fully worked out theory. So why go through all this trouble with suspending judgment? What's the payoff? According to Sextus, it's ataraxia, freedom from worry, peace of mind. This is the ultimate prize. Interestingly, the quest for ataraxia is where skepticism begins. Initially, you think, if I could just figure out the truth, settle these arguments, I'd be free from this mental turmoil. But, as we know, the attempt to find truth just leads to more suspension, and it's this very suspension that brings the peace. It's beautifully illustrated by the story of the painter Apelles. He's trying desperately to paint in foam on a horse's mouth, throwing his sponge in frustration, and then bam! The sponge imprint looks perfect. The skeptic, similarly, achieves his goal, peace, not by finding the truth, but by giving up the search for it. The initial anxiety wasn't about the content of beliefs, but the inability to decide. Now, Sextus gives us two main explanations for how this suspension leads to peace. First, there's the general account. Here, the idea is that suspending judgment on anything, whether it's cosmology, politics, or whatever, contributes to ataraxia. Why? Because it frees you from the gnawing anxiety of not knowing which conflicting view is right. Imagine being torn between two equally plausible theories about the universe. That tension, that worry is what suspension dissolves. Importantly, Sextus doesn't say here that discovering truth would be worse for peace. If you could somehow find the truth, maybe that would also bring peace. The problem was the endless cycle of trying to decide, which kept you stuck in suspension and anxiety. Peace comes from stopping the struggle, regardless of the subject matter. But then comes the second account, and this one feels different. Here, Sextus specifically highlights suspending judgment about what's good and bad as the key to peace. The logic is stark. If you believe something is truly good, you'll desperately want it. If you believe something is truly bad, you'll desperately want to avoid it. This creates intense emotional turmoil, constant striving, fear, desire. Think about someone obsessed with winning an Olympic gold medal, or someone terrified of failing a crucial exam. The skeptic, by contrast, is free from this. He doesn't hold these beliefs, so he doesn't feel that same level of anxiety or drive. There's a fascinating parallel here with the Stoics. Both aim for calm by freeing themselves from passions. But the Stoic sage achieves this by having correct beliefs about what's truly good or bad. The skeptic? He just lacks any such beliefs altogether. It's a different path to the same destination, perhaps? Does this second account, linking ethical beliefs directly to turmoil, really hold water? Well, sometimes it seems pretty obvious. Think about the star athlete chasing records, constantly worried about losing them. Someone who cares less about such achievements might be calmer. But flip the coin. Consider someone with deeply held moral convictions, say, about a specific social issue. Often, having that firm conviction provides a sense of security, a calmness that comes from knowing why you act a certain way. Being seriously conflicted about a moral choice, unsure what's right, can be far more stressful than having a clear conviction, even if others disagree with you. Now, the skeptic isn't conflicted. They just don't have the conviction at all. But can anyone really be so devoid of any ethical feeling or consideration? And even if possible, isn't the ability to find comfort and certainty in strong moral beliefs something valuable that both the conflicted person and the skeptic miss out on? It feels like the skeptic is trading potential peace of mind for a kind of emotional neutrality. So we've got this puzzle. Two seemingly different stories about why suspension brings peace. One says it's general non-commitment, the other specifically targets ethical beliefs. How do you square these circles? It's tough. The second account, focusing on good and bad, almost sidesteps the whole issue of truth or the inability to decide. It implies that even if your beliefs about good and bad were correct, they'd still cause you anxiety. It's the content, the belief itself, that's the problem, not whether it's true. This makes it hard to reconcile with the first account, which seems to imply that the problem was the struggle for truth. Sextus himself sometimes seems confused, blending these ideas together in passages like ph 125-30. It suggests he might not have had a single unified theory, or perhaps he saw them as related aspects of the same phenomenon. But for us trying to understand the Pyrrhonist position, this duality is a significant challenge. Alright, let's shift gears from why they're calm to what they actually do. How does a person who suspends judgment on everything navigate the world? Sextus says they follow appearances. Sounds simple, but what does that mean in practice? He breaks it down into 4 types. First, our basic perceptions and ways of thinking. That's just part of our natural makeup. Second, our basic drives. Hunger makes us eat, thirst makes us drink. Pretty basic. Then, moving into the cultural realm. Third, the laws and customs of society. We're raised in societies with rules, and we tend to conform because of habit and social pressure. Fourth, our training and expertise, learning a craft, developing skills. These all shape our behavior. So following appearances seems to cover a lot of ground, from basic instincts to learned behaviors. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, especially concerning ethics. The skeptic follows laws and customs. But remember, they reject the idea that anything is objectively good or bad. So, how does this work? Take piety versus impiety. Sextus says the skeptic accepts piety as good and impiety as bad in terms of ordinary life. But what does this acceptance mean? It absolutely cannot mean they believe the propositions piety is good or impiety is bad. Those are precisely the kinds of beliefs they're supposed to be avoiding. Instead, it must mean something much more superficial. It means they do the things their society expects regarding piety. They participate in rituals, follow religious practices, whatever. If asked why, they wouldn't offer a justification based on objective goodness. They'd simply say, my society raised me to do this. It's a causal explanation, not a normative one. It's like following fashion trends without believing the clothes themselves have any intrinsic value. This leads to a classic objection, often framed using the tyrant scenario. Imagine a tyrant forces you to do something horrible, or threatens you with something awful. How can the skeptic possibly choose? Surely, whatever choice he makes, it must be based on some underlying principle about what's genuinely good or bad, right? But Sextus counters this. He says the decision isn't based on any principles of good or bad. Instead, it's determined by the preconception which accords with his ancestral laws and customs. Basically, it's whatever habits and dispositions his upbringing instilled in him. If he grew up in a culture that values resistance to tyranny, he might refuse. If he grew up in a culture that emphasizes obedience above all, he might comply. Either way, it's not a conscious ethical calculation, it's just the default setting of his character, shaped by environment. And crucially, he remains detached, having no opinion on whether the action was right or wrong. But does this response really hold up? First, can anyone really be that detached in a life or death situation? When faced with such extreme stakes, doesn't it force a kind of conscious choice and identification with certain values, even if reluctantly? Can you truly just be a bundle of dispositions unfolding without feeling like a self making a decision? It feels deeply counterintuitive. Second, even if we grant this passivity, is the outcome really open? If it's just about ingrained habits, wouldn't the path of least resistance, compliance, be overwhelmingly likely? Standing up to a tyrant risks torture, which the skeptic admits he feels pain from. Unless his upbringing gave him incredibly strong, deeply ingrained convictions about resisting tyranny, wouldn't his basic desire to avoid suffering push him towards submission? The skeptic's dispositions, lacking the extra motivational juice of genuine belief, might just crumble under pressure. Beyond the tyrant scenario, there's a broader concern: the skeptic's general conformity. Since his character is shaped by prevailing norms, as Sextus explains, he tends to do what everyone else does. Challenging the status quo would require dispositions that run against the grain of those very norms. Even if we entertain the idea that maybe some skeptics had unusually unconventional parents, the core issue remains. The skeptic's attitude towards his own actions is passive. He's not deeply invested in his choices because he lacks the underlying beliefs that make them meaningful to him. This passivity makes his ingrained dispositions fragile. When facing difficult choices, unpopular opinions, or situations where stepping out of line is costly, his natural inclinations towards self-preservation, avoiding pain, are likely to easily override whatever societal programming he has. It's like having a car programmed to drive straight, but with no steering wheel or brakes you can actually control. So, how ethically engaged can this Pyrrhonist actually be? If we define ethics narrowly as simply doing the right thing, then maybe, just maybe, if a skeptic was raised in a super-ethical environment, his ingrained habits might lead him to consistently do the right thing. Conversely, if raised in a corrupt society, probably not. But this feels like a very shallow understanding of ethics. What about situations where doing the right thing is painful or costly? As we discussed, the skeptic's other natural drives, like avoiding pain, might easily take over. He lacks the internal motivation that belief provides. Bernard Williams talked about agents having one thought too many in tough situations, creating inner conflict. Here, the skeptic arguably has one thought too few, the missing belief that makes the right action feel necessary and compelling. Even if he performs the correct action, is he truly acting ethically, or just following a script? Let's dig deeper. Is the core issue really just rejecting ethical objectivism, the idea that there are objective moral truths? Maybe not. Think about what makes someone ethically engaged. It's not necessarily believing in objective values. It's more about caring deeply about certain things, thinking they matter intrinsically, not just because they benefit you. For such a person, certain actions become necessary, others forbidden. Now, could someone who rejects objectivism still be ethically engaged? Yes, potentially. But the skeptic Sextus describes cannot be. Why? Because the whole point of his skepticism is to achieve tranquility by releasing himself from caring deeply about anything. Involvement itself, taking things seriously, is what he wants to escape. If there were ways to be involved without committing to objective good or bad, he'd reject those too. Anything that matters, period, is something he wants to suspend judgment about. So, what's really driving this lack of ethical engagement? It seems to boil down to the goal: tranquility, ataraxia. If your entire aim in life is peace of mind, then you logically need to minimize anything that could disturb that peace. Things that matter deeply tend to cause worry, desire, fear, disappointment, excitement, all potential disruptors of tranquility. Therefore, the Pyrrhonist withdraws intellectually by suspending judgment and practically by adopting a detached attitude towards life's demands. This withdrawal makes sense if tranquility is the top priority. But here's the kicker: aiming for tranquility doesn't inherently require abandoning belief in objective good or bad. Other philosophies, like Epicureanism, aimed for tranquility while still believing certain things were objectively good. And indeed, history provides examples. Think of Jean-Paul Sartre. His existentialism basically said there's no ultimate reason for anything, no God or cosmic blueprint. You just have to choose, commit, and create yourself through your choices. Despite this radical lack of grounding, Sartre was incredibly politically engaged, involved in the French Resistance. Or consider a J. Ayer. Though his early emotivism was challenged, he consistently viewed ethical statements as expressing attitudes rather than describing facts. Yet he was famously ethically engaged, intervening at parties to stop harassment, like persuading Mike Tyson to back off Naomi Campbell. These guys show that you can be passionate about ethics, believe things matter, without necessarily subscribing to a theory of objective moral facts. Ethics can be a project, even if you doubt its ultimate foundation. Now let's return to the skeptic. Could he, like Ayer, intervene in that Tyson incident? Maybe if his upbringing made him strongly conditioned against such behavior. But even if he did, would it be ethically engaged? Probably not in the way we understand it. Why? Because he wouldn't have any investment in the outcome. Intervening, while perhaps following social cues, wouldn't stem from a genuine care about the injustice or harm occurring. It wouldn't matter to him in the same way it matters to someone who believes such actions are objectively wrong. The fundamental barrier isn't just the lack of belief in objective good or bad, it's the overarching orientation towards tranquility. That's the lens through which all actions are filtered. Anything that risks disrupting that peace is suspect. Interestingly, we see a similar tension with the Epicureans. They also aimed for tranquility, ataraxia, but unlike the Pyrrhonists, they believed truth was attainable and that tranquility itself was objectively good. Still, they faced criticism for being too withdrawn, too focused on personal peace, and not sufficiently engaged in community or friendship. How can you be a true friend, genuinely caring for another's well-being, if that care itself risks disturbing your own tranquility? Friendship, after all, seems to require a level of involvement, a prioritization of the other's good, that feels incompatible with radical self-centeredness. So, again, we see the prioritization of tranquility as the ultimate goal potentially clashing with the demands of a fully engaged ethical life, regardless of whether you believe in objective values. Should the Pyrrhonist care that his approach makes him seem ethically uninvolved? From his perspective, probably not. If tranquility is truly his telos, his ultimate aim, and he believes suspension of judgment is the surest way to get there, then his detachment makes perfect sense. Whether others find it attractive or repulsive is irrelevant to his project. Are there cracks in this armor? Maybe. Sextus, in his closing chapter, surprisingly calls his school philanthropic, wanting to cure others of the afflictions of belief. If he genuinely wants to convert people, shouldn't he care if his lifestyle turns them off? Perhaps that's an exception, though. Also, he sometimes uses the term eudaimonia, happiness, which traditionally meant a flourishing, virtuous life. Does he aspire to this? If so, then his lack of ethical engagement becomes a problem. But interestingly, he avoids using eudaimonia in his main work, The Outlines. Maybe he sensed the dogmatic baggage associated with it, perhaps implying a life lived according to virtue, which he explicitly rejects. So wrapping up, Sextus presents a remarkably consistent picture. The Pyrrhonist, by suspending judgment, especially on ethics, achieves his goal of tranquility, and thereby considers himself superior. He can logically defend this position. And yet, from our perspective, this very detachment feels deeply unsatisfying. We can agree to disagree. The text lays out a coherent, if ultimately unappealing, philosophical stance. It challenges us to consider what we value in a life well lived, and whether tranquility, understood in this way, is truly the highest good. That's the landscape Sextus maps for us.